Next on Newsmax Prime, trumping the tax code. Donald Trump unveils his tax plan, but the billionaire presidential candidate also devotes a good bit of time to discussing spending cuts. Then, John Kasich helped cut spending and was the architect of the first balanced budget in a generation during his days on Capitol Hill. Now the Ohio governor wants to return to Washington as president, and he outlines his priorities on taxing and spending in my exclusive interview. Plus, outgoing House Speaker John Boehner blames false prophets for his problems. But was it more a case of his own false promises? We'll discuss as Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening. Welcome to the Monday night edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, Boehner plays the blame game while Trump takes on the tax code. The outgoing speaker used a Sunday show appearance to strike out against his conservative critics. We'll talk more about that a bit later. But we begin with Donald Trump's take on tax reform. The presidential candidate unveiled his new tax plan this morning, and Miranda Kahn has more from our Newsmax Prime newsroom. Miranda?
Judy, if you're single and make $25,000 a year, or if you and your spouse earn a combined $50,000 a year or less, you would pay no income tax under the Trump plan. The Donald offered this overview at this morning's news conference.
We have an amazing code. It will be simple. It will be easy. It will be fair. It's graduated. As you get up in income, you pay a little more. Some of the very unfair deductions that certain people have been given who make a lot of money will not be available any longer. But I actually believe they'll do better because I think the economy will grow. It'll grow rapidly, and we'll have something very special.
Trump is calling for tax simplification. In addition to the zero bracket, there are three others: 10%, 20%, and 25%. And when it comes to the corporate taxation, the candidate proposes a flat rate for businesses all across the board.
So for business, no business of any size, from a Fortune 500 company to a mom-and-pop shop to a freelancer living from gig to gig, will pay more than 15% of their business income in taxes.
Now, Trump insists that he will bring back jobs and money. One way he intends on doing that is by allowing corporate cash now held overseas to be transferred back to the U.S. for a one-time discounted tax rate of 10%. While he's counting on substantial economic growth with these policies, he says government must restrain spending, and he says he's just the candidate who can do that. J.D.?
Thanks, Miranda. For more on this story, we're pleased to be joined via telephone by the senior analyst for Zogby Analytics, John Zogby. John, of course, also co-author of the book, First Globals, Understanding, Managing, and Unleashing Our Millennial Generation. And joining us via Skype, the president of Shirley and Banister Public Affairs, Craig Shirley. Craig is also the author of the soon-to-be-released book, Last Act: The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. Craig Shirley, let me start with you. Would you characterize the Trump tax plan as Reagan-esque?
Oh, I think very much so, J.D. Just at a cursory glance, it takes money and power away from Washington and sends it back to the individual. I also think it's a rather brilliant maneuver by Donald Trump. You know, American politics is really about getting people's attention, then making an argument. Over the last several months, he's been working to get people's attention. Now he's making an argument. He came out with an immigration proposal. Now he's come out with a tax proposal. So he's got some issue meat to hang on his candidacy, and I think it's all to his benefit, actually.
John Zogby, the Donald kind of rolled this out with a preview last night on 60 Minutes, and Scott Pelley was saying, hey, this doesn't sound like a Republican plan. Now, that kind of description, even though Craig just called it Reagan-esque, do you believe the Trump plan will appeal to Democrats and independent voters?
Sure, I don't see why not, and I think it was brilliant to trot it out on one of the most watched television shows in the country. But yeah, I think very importantly, there's something in this for everyone, for Republicans and conservatives. It's pro-growth, it's simpler, cleaner, fairer. for Democrats as well, an opportunity for tax cuts, but also to raise sufficient revenue. Even though he's talking spending cuts, you do have to worry about the sufficient revenue to run at least some sort of government. And so I think it's a stroke of genius, actually, and well timed on his part. As Craig just pointed out, you can't go with bluster too much longer. Now people are listening.
And people will be taking a good look at that plan and a look at all the candidates as we pick a new president next year. Now, Republicans on Capitol Hill will soon have to pick a new speaker. John Boehner's resignation late last week will take effect late in October. The current speaker was on Face the Nation on CBS yesterday, and he blamed conservatives for a lot of the challenges he confronted. Let's listen and get your reaction.
Absolutely, they're unrealistic. But the Bible says beware of false prophets. And there are people out there, spreading noise about how much can get done.
Craig, Shirley, false prophets or false promises from Boehner on the campaign trail in 2012?
This is not the way to go out of office as Speaker of the House and number 2 in line for the presidency of the United States. Is that, admittedly, John Boehner's speakership will go down in history as probably being mediocre. A lot wasn't done. Some things were done. But he should be going out, and he needs to make an argument that's kind of above the fray instead of getting down lower into the fray. And I think he did. And so he's going out rather poorly, I would say.
John Zogby, Congress is never really held in great regard by the American people, but with Boehner's sour grapes and the usual disdain, will this have a really damaging effect in terms of polling for congressional Republicans?
Oh, I think so, sure. I mean, legislators are elected to legislate. That means to get the people's business done. And, what we heard from the speaker yesterday was, the result of years and years of his frustration. There's some people who are elected to Washington, essentially to gum up the works and to hold fast and not compromise on their principles. And this guy was a legislator. I mean, I felt his pain and his frustration, to be honest with you.
Well, legislator may be one thing, but Speaker of the House means you have to kind of get in there and work things out, and that did not happen. Last word on Boehner very quickly, Craig.
I think that Newt Gingrich, in terms of history and his speakership, is rising in estimation. Pelosi, Hastert, and Boehner come in very mediocre. You're starting to look back at the 104th Congress, your Congress, I might add. It did a lot of very, very good work, and I think that stands now as it is rising in historians' estimation.
Now, before we go, we have to return to presidential politics, and John Zogby is our pollster. We're going to take a closer look at the new NBC Wall Street Journal poll. On the Republican side, Donald Trump is in the lead, but only 1 percentage point ahead of Ben Carson, so that's a statistical tie. Then Carly Fiorina and Marco Rubio are knotted at 11% apiece. John Zogby, you've been saying Trump, his expiration date is near. But with the tax policy today, do you really think he's going to head down in the polls, or will he broaden his lead?
Well, no, I think he may get a bump from the tax policy because he's changed the subject, and albeit a good subject, one, as I pointed out, that has broad appeal. So I think he'll get a bump. But I think more importantly, what you're seeing is this race start to shake out a little bit. You're starting to see some candidates who might have a little bit of juice, in the top 4, and others who seem to be really stuck for the time being. But at least I think we're beginning to get some clarity.
And as we move forward to get more clarity, we will have to invite you gents back as our time is up. Craig, Shirley, and John Zogby, gentlemen, you have our thanks. So, Ben Carson doing well in that recent poll. And a reminder for you that you can get your copy of Dr. Carson's New York Times best-selling book, One Nation, What We Can Do to Save America's Future, by calling 1-800-485-4350 right now. That's 1-800-485-4350, or visit newsmax.com/Ben.